clear to me, as someone who worked in the intelligence community, not during this period, of course, I was too young, but very shortly thereafter, that these attacks could have been prevented. And in fact, the government says this too. But the government goes, the reason that these attacks happened, the reason that they weren't prevented, is what they call stovepiping, right? There was not enough sharing. They needed to break down the walls and the restrictions that were chaining these poor patriots at the NSA and the CIA and the FBI from all working on the same team. And to some extent, they're correct on this, right? There were limits on the way agencies were supposed to play ball with each other, but I worked there, and I know how much of this is bullshit and how much of this is not. Those are procedural and policy limits, in some cases legal limits, on what can be shared without following a process, without doing this, that, or the other, without basically asking for permission, without getting a sign-off, or anything like that. If the FBI wanted to send absolutely everything they had to the CIA, they could have done so. If the CIA wanted to send everything they had to the FBI, they could have done so. They didn't, and people died as a result. Now, government goes, bureaucratic proceduralism was responsible, and it's because we had too many restrictions on the intelligence community. And this is what led to the world post 9/11, where all of our rights sort of evaporated, was they went, well, restrictions on what these agencies can do are costing lives. Therefore, naturally, we just have to unchain these guys and everything will be better, right? And if you remember that post 9/11 moment, you can understand how that actually could come off as persuasive, how that might be a kind of thing that you go, all right, well, that makes sense, because everybody was terrified, right? There were people quite quickly who got their heads back on their shoulders the right way. There were some of them who never lost their heads at all, and who protested the Iraq War. At the same time, my dumb self was signing up to go fight it, volunteering for the Army, and we'll get into that in a minute. But everything that has followed in the decades past came from the fact that in a moment of fear, we lost our heads. And we abandoned all the traditional constitutional restraints that we put on these agencies. And we abandoned all of the traditional political restraints and just social constraints, ideological systems of belief about the limitations that the secret police should have in a free and open society. And we went, look, terrorists, we created shows like 24 and Jack Bauer, where he's like threatening to knife people's eyeballs out if they won't tell him this, that, or the other. And we entered this era of increasingly unlimited government as a result. And now in hindsight, we go, oh, well, we should have been surprised. But at the time, everyone panicked, right? But if you go back to, did that help? And we know the answer now is, in fact, no, it did not. It made things worse. I don't think any historian is going to look at the Bush administration and go, this improved the position of the United States in the world. But if you go back, wind back the tape to that pre-9/11 moment, wind back the tape to those silos and those walls that they said needed to come down because that was restraining government, instead of the rules that said, well, you can share these things, but there's got to be a basis, there's got to be a justification. You've got to go, why are we trading people's information like baseball cards and all of this stuff? It's super easy as an intelligence officer to justify sharing information about a suspected terrorist who you think is planning to kill people, or is even just in a country they shouldn't be, or a place they shouldn't be, or doing something you don't think they should be, with another agency, because no one's going to question that. A judge isn't going to question that. Any judge in the world will stamp that warrant without even thinking about it and then go to bed that night, without a care in the world. Because you're not spying on a journalist, you're not spying on a human rights defender, right? This is not an edge case. This is someone that you believe to be associated with Al-Qaeda or whatever. Now, this is all a lot of preamble to say that essential fact. Government agrees, everyone agrees, the attacks probably could have been prevented if information had been shared. So, why wasn't the information shared? Government says information wasn't shared because of these restrictions, and it's half true, because every important lie has some kernel of truth to it. And there were these barriers. But the reality is, why were those barriers respected in the case of a major terrorist plot? Why wasn't the CIA sharing information with the FBI? Why wasn't the FBI sharing information with the NSA? Why wasn't the NSA sharing information with the CIA in the case of a major terrorist plot? And if you've worked in government, if you've worked in the intelligence community, if you worked in any large institution, if you work at a company that sells batteries, you know that every office is fighting the other office for budget, for clout, for promotions. And this is the sad reality of what actually happened. Every one of those agencies wanted to be the guy who busted the plot. They wanted to be the one who got credit for it. And they didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late, because they were competing with each other. Because they were competing with each other.
Because they were competing with each other.